We're live.
Okay, Dawn, ready anytime.
Hi all. I was seeing the participant number go up, so but let's go ahead and start. My name is Dawn Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Wildlife Health for Smithsonian's Global Health Program. And thank you for joining this webinar, The Female Health Across the Tree of Life. It's my absolute pleasure to host this session on Earth Day. This project presents an ambitious and interdisciplinary collaboration that really is increasing our understanding of diseases that are shared across the animal world. And this is to benefit all life. A few things to note. First off is the webinar is being recorded, and this will be posted to the Earth Optimism website, which we'll link in the chat, and to YouTube early next week. Also in the chat box, feel free to throw in some comments about yourselves. Love to know more about you, where you're joining from, any specific interest you have in this session. For any questions, to the left of the chat box is a Q&A box. So feel free to post any questions there throughout the session. We'll be collating those for answers after the session because we're just a little short on time, and we'll post those to the event page, which we'll also link in the chat. Additionally, I posted the schedule. So this is an 1.5-hour webinar. It's slightly deviated from the initial posting. So the keynote is going to be about 30 minutes, followed by 8 5-minute presentations. And these are going to represent synergies across animal species and research findings that make us really optimistic in combating some of the deadliest diseases in the world. So it's these types of initiatives that I personally really passionate about. It merges the veterinary and the human medical world, and it's solving complex problems. So we're looking for answers holistically in nature and through evolution. And this is something that makes me optimistic for planetary health. So I'm also further excited that our focus today is on female health. Historically is a neglected topic. And again, there are synergies across the world of animal species. So with that, it is a complete honor to present Dr. Barbara Horowitz. She's a cardiologist and evolutionary biologist on the faculty of Harvard and UCLA medical schools, and a New York Times bestselling author of the award-winning popular science books, Zoobiquity and Wildhood. Her research focuses on animals in natural settings as a source of insight for human health and development. And last year, she launched the Female Health Across the Tree of Life, multidisciplinary research and educational collaboration focused on accelerating innovation in women's health through a deeper understanding of the health of all female animals on the planet. And we will link her biography also in the chat. And let me turn the screen over to Dr. Horowitz.
Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman. Dawn, if I may, we can call me Barbara, and let's have some fun. I'm really honored. It's been really wonderful, truly working with Dawn and getting things organized. And I want to thank Earth Optimism, the Smithsonian Conservation Commons, and Andrea Santee, and everyone for helping make this possible. So I am going to give a brief keynote presentation, and then we're going to turn it over to our magnificent students to hear about their research. Well, I was a human doctor. I still am, but for about 20 years, I was practicing medicine as a professor of medicine and cardiology at UCLA. And then one day I got a telephone call from a veterinarian at the Los Angeles Zoo that changed my life. That call was a request to provide some cardiovascular consultation under the supervision, of course, of the excellent veterinarians who took care of the animals at the zoo, and to provide some cardiovascular consultation on some of their animal patients. And of course, this was thrilling. I had an opportunity to rule out a torn aorta in a gorilla, a heart failure in an orangutan. There was a chimpanzee they thought had had a stroke. And I remember when I actually did this particular procedure, I put this probe into the esophagus of this chimpanzee. And this is a procedure I had done on many, many human patients over many years. Of course, never had done it on a chimp, but I put the probe down, and this is what I saw. And over here, you're looking at an ultrasound of a heart. Excuse me. It's a 4-chambered beating heart, left ventricle, left atrium, right atrium. And you can appreciate these bouncing shadows, and those were blood clots. And I immediately recognized what this problem was, but it triggered a memory of an echocardiogram, an ultrasound that I had done on a human patient not long before. And it turned out, here you see the left ventricle, left atrium, right atrium, and you see again these blood clots, blood clots, blood clots. And it turned out these two animals, this chimpanzee female and this human female, had actually the same form of cardiomyopathy. And what struck me about this, and it really was an aha moment, was that in all of the years that I'd been taking care of this problem and had been teaching medical students and residents about it, I really had not considered other animals that might spontaneously, that is naturally, develop this disorder. In medical school, of course, I had learned about the important role of animals in laboratory investigation and about zoonotic infections, those diseases that are infectious diseases passed between species, humans and other animals. But I really hadn't thought much at all about the shared forms of heart disease and cancer and even psychiatric diseases, not at all. Well, I was really fortunate to be introduced to Catherine Bowers, a brilliant naturalist, and the two of us together have spent really now over a decade exploring the natural world for insights into human health and development. We've written a couple of books together. The first was on the medical connections across species. We also spotted a profound lack of or inadequate knowledge exchange across human and veterinary medicine. And we founded the Zubiquity conferences back in 2011 to bring together leaders in human and veterinary medicine for collaborations and conversations. For more about those conferences, you can go to this website. But we really were very, very driven to see how we could foster collaboration. Well, what I began to see, and this happened over the course of several years, was that in human medicine and my education as a physician, it was very human centered. And in fact, there's a long tradition of anthropocentrism in medicine. But what I began to see was that by looking beyond that single species perspective, by adopting a species spanning perspective, applying that lens, I could see patterns and commonalities that were not available, that were obscured by the single species view. And then as I recognized these shared commonalities, I asked questions about why, and of course, began to see that not only applying a species spanning lens, but applying an evolutionary lens, that is looking at why we share these commonalities with other species. And the answer, of course, is that we are part of this ancient evolutionary legacy, that we share ancestry and we share biology. And so this perspective really began to transform my understanding, not only of human medicine, but pretty much of every aspect of my life. Well, one of the things I quickly realized is that in order to really adopt a species spanning perspective, we have to recognize and acknowledge that most of us are blinded to some extent by human exceptionalism. And I really do think that human exceptionalism, this idea that we humans are uniquely unique, is a blindfold, and it prevents us from recognizing connections that, if we saw them, could allow us to better understand so much about ourselves and the rest of the world. And of course, it's important to remember that we are only one species. There are about 5.5 million other animal species, about 8.7 other species. This is a phylogeny. This is a circular phylogeny. A phylogeny is a model that evolutionary biologists build to show the relationship between species and their characteristics. And these little lines on the outside of the circle, each one of those is a species, right? You've got your fungi, those species over here, your bacteria, your plants over here. And here in the northwest quadrant are animals, and there we are, just one species, Homo sapiens. Well, back to the zoo for a moment. Eventually, I guess I graduated in a sense beyond primates, and they asked me to do some consulting on some of their carnivores. And one case particular really impacted my thinking about not only species spanning approach to medicine, but whether there was an application for women's health. So this is actually a picture of me doing a post-operative check on Cookie. Cookie was an elderly lion. She had been at the zoo for quite a long time. And one of the veterinarians called me one day because it turned out she had collected nearly a liter of fluid in the pericardial sac. That's the sac in which the heart is contained. And the veterinarians actually, we ended up draining the fluid, but the veterinarians told me that they were concerned that she might have metastatic breast cancer. And when I asked why, they explained that felids, big cats in zoological institutions, sometimes seem to have higher rates of breast cancer than some other mammals. And this really got me thinking, first of all, if I hadn't really thought about the connection between heart disease and other disorders across species, I certainly hadn't thought of the continuity of vulnerability to disease across female animals. But here it was. And this actually got me very excited about thinking about my own life and my work in a different way. Partly this was because in the mid 2000s, I really became aware of the not very flattering history of women's health research. So, up until really the 1980s, there was a very significant bias, male focused biomedical research. And actually, it took too long. It should have happened more quickly. But consider that in the 1980s, you had recognition that women were from research, from clinical trials. And the NIH was encouraging the inclusion of women in clinical trials. And by the way, women were not only not part of clinical trials, they were underrepresented when they were in diseases that were primarily affecting women. And of course, in the 1990s, fortunately, the NIH launched the Office of Research on Women's Health, which has really accelerated things. But even it wasn't until 1993 that clinical trials, that studies funded by the NIH were required to include women. And not until really 2016 that sex as a biological variable was really mandated. It was identified as absolutely important. So we're moving in the right direction, but there was this lag, and I was aware of it. And so I began wondering whether the same blindfold of human exceptionalism that had prevented me from seeing species spanning connections and this evolutionary perspective, if there was another blindfold. And that was a blindfold that was based on this sort of historically male centered tradition in medicine. And so I asked, what if we applied a sex, gender, and species spanning lens, if those lenses could be applied? And I came to believe that if we did that, we could have absolutely deeper evolutionary insights, a deeper understanding of why we get sick, and an acceleration of solutions. Well, let me just have some fun. One of the reasons that that this is kind of well, just fun to kind of think about is actually there are more female animals on the planet than there are males, and it's not a competition, but it's just kind of interesting. So there are approximately 10 to the 15th individual animals. I'm not talking about species, I'm talking about individual animals, and that number is, a lot of people quibble some, but it's a lot of zeros. And these are human species. This is yes, a human and non-human. And if we look at gender, so blue is female, yellow is male, and green is unknown. And that's a whole other story because so many species, particularly invertebrate species, we don't know. But you can see that there's more blue than there is yellow. And actually there's invertebrates, there's vertebrates. And when you break it down into fish, amphibians, and reptiles, you see, it's interesting. There's more blue. Anyway, again, it's not a competition, but just for the record, it appears that because of the sex ratio in some species, there may be more females than males. All right. So I asked, could the application of not only a species spanning lens, but sex and gender spanning lenses enhance the health of women and girls? And critically, because again, we have to be looking beyond our species as we move into this new era. Could the application of sex, gender, and species spanning lenses enhance the health of other non human female animals? And the answer to those questions was a resounding yes. And We can accomplish this in two ways. Number one, we can begin to look at why we have such shared vulnerability to so many diseases across species. We females, let's say female animals, share so much vulnerability to disease. And we can turn to the natural world. We can turn to the evolved adaptations in female animals as a source of solutions, as a guide, as a blueprint for innovation in women's health. Well, let's take a moment to talk about shared vulnerability. It turns out we humans share vulnerability to a range of cancers that are important cancers in women's health. Uterine and endometrial carcinoma in certain mammals is well known. Ovarian cancer in not just mammals, by the way, in some birds and even fish and reptiles. Ovarian cancer is a risk, and breast cancer, of course, as well. And sorry for the uncomfortable picture, but the point is that the mammary gland, right, the breast defines mammalia, and mammals are vulnerable to breast cancer. This is actually a cat. This is a mastectomy scar in a cat who had breast cancer. And so as we look at this phylogeny and we see these species, we look at cancer across vertebrates, and these are the top 10 cancers that are associated with high human mortality. And as we look at breast cancer, we see how many mammals are impacted by this, and more than what are on this phylogeny, of course. And as we look at ovarian cancer, we see the range of species in which this has been identified, and endometrial cancer as well. And of course, we humans have all three. Shared vulnerability. The nature of this vulnerability is important to understand, and there are many opportunities to deepen to improve the kinds of research that we do through this insight. But we humans also share vulnerability to other forms of pathology, including psychopathology, mental health and mental illness. This concept, which seems so human centric, is in fact not at all. Mental illness, psychopathology exists across animal life. There are syndromes of maternal, postpartum maternal rejection and difficulty with neonates, which you're going to hear about in a few minutes. There are compulsive disorders in some animals. This is a bird with feather plucking disorder, which appears to have some phenomenological and mechanistic linkages to a disorder in humans called trichotillomania, hair plucking, which impacts women more than men. And it goes on and on. But why we share this vulnerability? Well, there are really two reasons. One is, of course, that we have this shared uh, ancestry as females on planet Earth, as animals on planet Earth, but we also share environments. Here is a woman, and you see that vulnerability to disease is going to be impacted by the health of her environment, right? The presence or absence of experiences and substances that can either strengthen her health or weaken it. But of course, that is not just humans. That is true for every female animal on planet Earth. And in fact, as climate change and ecological degradation and other anthropogenic effects begin to really erase the line that once demarcated human environments and non-human environments, you know, human and animal, as that line is blurred and then actually erased in some ways, the importance of the health of other female animals takes on renewed importance and new salience for the health of the human female. In fact, as we increasingly are sharing environments and exposures, all of us, every female, has become a canary on a shared planetary coal mine. In other words, what we are exposed to, the other animals on planet Earth are often exposed to, and vice versa. Another reason, a strong call to action, that we must pay attention to the health of other species, and in this case, to the female members of those species. Of course, our vulnerability to disease is also shaped by evolution, by this ancient legacy of being a female on planet Earth. And again, you see a phylogeny. Here's this family tree used by evolutionary biologists to look at the relationship between species and their characteristics. And this common ancestry shapes our vulnerability as well. Well, it turns out that that common ancestry also can be a source of insights that can lead us to identify evolved adaptations of other species that can provide solutions for challenges in women's health. So, what do we mean by that? Well, evolution, right? We have the first life on Earth, the single celled organisms popping up about 3.5 billion years ago. And of course, we then have, more complex life evolving. And ultimately, we have complex multicellular life that we would consider animal life sometime between 800 and 600 million years ago. And you can see this diversification, this speciation into what are the vertebrates over here, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and birds. And over here we have mammals. And keep in mind that the process of speciation is really the creation of biodiversity. And evolved adaptations are the basis of this biodiversity. Evolved adaptations are the adaptations that animals, that species, that individuals exhibit in order to adapt to the challenges of an environment, in order to optimize their fitness in a new or changed environment. And so we see tremendous diversity, biodiversity in these different taxa. And if we begin to recognize that those adaptations are solutions to challenges those animals encountered, we can leverage those adaptations and those physiologies to identify solutions potentially for otherwise difficult or even intractable problems in women's health. And today you're going to be hearing some wonderful research that my students have been doing and learn about some of these evolved adaptations and the biodiversity that we see and the opportunity to see within biodiversity, to recognize that contained within the biodiversity of animal life on planet Earth, there may be evolved adaptations that are solutions to otherwise intractable problems in women's health. Some of the projects you're going to hear about today are the issue of gestational hypertension, which is the leading cause of fetal and maternal mortality in our species, and how other species may have adapted protective mechanisms. We're also going to hear about osteoporosis. I'm going to let the students speak. This is a really exciting moment because the natural world can be encountered as a source of evolved adaptations with salience for women's health. This is really a way of introducing what is an exciting emerging field of bio-inspired medicine, which is really a form of biomimicry, bioinspiration. These are all the same thing. And it's this idea that over hundreds of millions of years, evolved adaptations have optimized solutions. In other words, evolution is a massive research and development project, a hyper iterative R&D project which produces phenotypes that would be very difficult to arrive at with our limited period of time. One example that's often given, it's not medical, is this is a picture of the bullet train in Japan, the Shinkansen. And in the mid-1960s in Tokyo, this was introduced. It was a very big success. Japan was back after the war. It was wonderful, except for one significant problem. As the train decelerated into the station, it caused a huge amount of reverberation and vibration. And this was a problem. Well, it turned out that one of the engineers was an amateur ornithologist. He was a birder. And he knew that the kingfisher bird was a species that had this beak that had evolved to be so smooth and sleek that it could pierce the water without creating a single ripple. Of course, this was adaptive. This would be beneficial for the organism, for the bird, so it could attract more prey or not scare off prey. And so this engineer redesigned the nose of the bullet train in the using the kingfisher's beak as a guide. Well, this approach can be applied to medicine. We can look at, let's say, a woodpecker who has repetitive concussive force applied to its brain case, but appears not to suffer traumatic brain injury. This can be a source of inspiration for understanding protection from concussions. Or animals like the vulture or other species that are able to eat rotting meat, carrion. The adaptations that allow these animals to do this could be a source of insight in food safety. And of course, there are the killifish who are able to adapt to extremes of climate and move from gill-based to transdermal respiration in drought. Can be a source of insights as climate challenges the health of our planet. But we are going to focus now, today, on the applications of biomimicry, of bio-inspired approaches, of bio-inspired medicine to women's health. We are going to look at the giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to a leading cause of mortality in women's health, which is cardiovascular disease, and specifically a form of congestive heart failure. We're going to look at the giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to the leading cause of fetal and maternal mortality in our species, gestational hypertension. We're going to look at some species, not this particular species, as a source of insights into osteoporosis, a very significant issue in women's health. And there are many more that we're not going to be focusing on today. But the point is that as we turn to the natural world and look at female animals and their evolved adaptations, the unique physiologies of these other animals, we begin to see this remarkable treasure for human health. And so we are going to move forward with the with all of these projects today, the research that the students have been engaged in. I'm a cardiologist, so I've started this project really looking at the giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to heart failure. And the idea underlying it is that the giraffe heart is down here, the brain is up here, and that left ventricle needs to pump very, very hard. And as a consequence, we see these very high blood pressures in the giraffe. Blood pressures as high as 300 millimeters of mercury, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. But the giraffe does not develop the problems that we have when when our hearts are exposed to high blood pressure. And so we have proposed that a species-specific adaptation in the giraffe allows its heart to thicken without developing the pathology and stiffness that leads to heart failure in women and men. And beyond this, we're going to also be looking at the ability of the pregnant giraffe, the female giraffe, to tolerate these high blood pressures during pregnancy, high blood pressures, which in our species could and often does harm to fetus and to mother. Well, before I pass things off to our really remarkable students, it is Earth Day, and I think there's no one better for us to derive inspiration from than, of course, Rachel Carson. And from her words, in nature, nothing exists alone. Our project really reinforces this, that in order for the health of any species to be sustained and improved, now more than ever, we need to recognize the connection across species and the special connection across female animals on planet Earth. And now you're going to hear from our students. They're going to be presenting quickly. No presentation is longer than 5 minutes. I want to tell you that this group of students, some of them are undergraduates at Harvard and at UCLA. Some of them are medical students. Some are secondary school students. And we even have an internal medicine resident who has left the critical care unit in order to present. And so we really have a great group of students. They come from different backgrounds, but they have in common a fierce intellect, endless energy, and a drive to find solutions. And they make me feel very optimistic. So with that, let's hear from our students who will be talking about their research on female health across the tree of life. First, we'll hear from Talia Natterson. Talia?
Hi, I'm Talia Natterson. I'm a junior in high school at Crossroads School in Santa Monica, California, and I'll be talking about menstruation across the tree of life. Menstruation is a central feature of the human reproductive cycle, which evolved in some evolutionary lineages and not others. While most mammals are non-menstruators, gaining knowledge into the physiology of non-menstruating species can be a source of insights into the health of women and girls. Next, menstruation is the shedding of endometrial tissue in a female mammal when conception and embryonic implantation does not occur. It is a central feature of the human reproductive cycle. In human females with a 28-day cycle, thickening of the superficial endometrial tissue between days 14 through 28 if conception and implantation doesn't occur. Next. While most mammals are non-menstruators, understanding the physiology of non-human menstruating species can be a source of insights which advance the health of women and girls. We performed a systematic review to identify the range of non-human mammalian species who menstruate. Our study revealed human-like menstruation in some primates, some bat species, the spiny mouse, and elephant shrew. Menstruation appears to have evolved more than 100 million years ago in the Eutherian lineage. In the phylogeny presented, the families in yellow represent the menstruators. Next. Here are examples of several menstruating species, including the short-tailed fruit bat, the spiny mouse, and the elephant shrew. Next. It is worth noting that in non-menstruating mammals, endometrial tissue is reabsorbed by the uterine tissue instead of being shed. A range of fascinating adaptations in other species have evolved to facilitate this reabsorption. Next. As climate change and other anthropogenic effects are increasingly being shown to impact human menstrual cycles, paying attention to menstruation in non-human species can strengthen our understanding of the relationship between our environment and our reproductive health. Next. Paying attention to health of non-human menstruators that we humans share environments with focuses our attention on improving all the menstruating and non-menstruating lives of females on planet Earth. And now we will hear more about the connection between the menstrual cycle and endometriosis across the tree of life with Ainsley Belle-Isle.
Hi everyone, happy Earth Day. As Talia said, I'm Ainsley. I am currently a graduate student in biology at the University of California, Los Angeles, studying the ecology and evolution of medicine, and my research focuses on insights into women's reproductive health across species. I've been studying the occurrence of endometriosis across mammalian species and the evolution of menstruation in several lineages to better understand human and non-human vulnerability to this disorder. Next. Endometriosis is a medical condition in which endometrial-like glands and stroma grow outside the uterus. Next. This condition often results in debilitating pain and risk of infertility and can have a serious impact on the quality of life for affected patients. This disease impacts an estimated 1 in 10 women during their reproductive years, totaling nearly 70 million women worldwide. While there is no cure per se for endometriosis, most treatments tend to focus on symptom management, either through pain relief or hormonal treatments. The most extreme cases may even require a hysterectomy in order to alleviate symptoms. Thus, endometriosis remains a significant problem, yet it is poorly understood. While a single species perspective has been insufficient to explain the origins, a species spanning perspective across the tree of life can provide insights to better understand the causal factors and potential treatments for this disease. Next. Retrograde menstruation is the oldest and most widely accepted hypothesis and posits that endometriosis results from the retrograde flow of endometrial tissue through the fallopian tubes and into the extrauterine space, where it then implants into the ectopic tissue. However, this explanation is insufficient, as research has shown that between 76 to 90% of women will experience retrograde flow, while only about 10% of women will develop endometriosis. Furthermore, while rare, endometriosis has been documented in biological males and in prepubescent females. Next. To further investigate vulnerability to endometriosis, we conducted a systematic review through PubMed and VIN, which is the National Veterinary Database. And from this review, we identified endometriosis in about 20 non-human species, seen here at the level of the family taxa. Next. In addition to humans, 14 non-human primates and 1 bat species, all of whom are menstruators, we identified 5 non-menstruating mammals with evidence of susceptibility to endometriosis in the literature. These 5 species include dogs, guinea pigs, hamsters, hedgehogs, and horses. Next. Our findings challenge retrograde menstruation, not just as the singular cause of endometriosis, but also as the causal factor behind the disease, since we found non-menstruating species to be vulnerable. Next. And next. They also bolster hypotheses that do not depend on menstruation, such as the metaplasia theories, which posit an ectopic origin of endometrial tissue in which one cell type is converted to another in tissue-specific stem cells, potentially along with an immune dysfunction hypothesis, which proposes that ectopic endometrial tissue triggers an inflammatory response, preventing the elimination and promoting implantation and growth of ectopic endometrial tissue. Next. In conclusion, we can only learn so much by studying humans, but by looking across species and evolutionary time at vulnerability to endometriosis, we may be better able to understand why humans are vulnerable to the disease and what we can do to better protect the reproductive health of all female animals. Thank you. Now to hear about another shared vulnerability in female mammals, we present Alex Masters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Masters, and I am a current third-year medical student at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College in Philadelphia, and I'm here to present a little bit about our research on postpartum syndromes across the tree of life. So starting off, postpartum syndrome in humans, also known as postpartum depression, involves depression that begins shortly following child delivery with symptoms that include anxiety, insomnia, feelings of hopelessness, and fears of harming the infant or oneself. Postpartum depression can be extremely severe, with up to 14% of postpartum women considering self-harm during this period, and suicide, unfortunately, contributes up to 20% of deaths in all postpartum women. Postpartum depression is estimated to affect around 13.2% of people who give birth, with some estimates projecting even higher numbers. It is important to note that the prevalence of postpartum depression is higher than the prevalence of depression unrelated to pregnancy. Postpartum depression can be dangerous for both the mother as well as for the newborn. In one study, 41% of mothers with postpartum depression considered harming their infants compared to only 7% of non-depressed controls. Depressed mothers are also more likely to consider harming themselves. The current understanding of postpartum depression is limited, and this limits our options for treatment. This is where a species-spanning perspective offers possible insights. While there are, of course, unique features to postpartum syndrome in our own species, postpartum maternal syndromes associated with reduced neonatal care and even neonatal harm have been identified in many mammalian and even in some non-mammalian species. In order to fully analyze the causes of postpartum depression and properly treat the condition, we propose looking to the animal kingdom for answers. Phylogenetic analysis.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry to stop that. Dawn, can you hear, are you watching the video?
Yeah, it's going fine.
Okay, I got a text that it wasn't running. Okay, sorry about that.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, I will.
When you go on, you can just fast forward it down at the bottom.
Yep, okay, here we go. Sorry. Yeah, somebody texted me that it wasn't running. Okay.
Depression unrelated. Depressed mothers are sites.
Okay.
Reduced neonatal care.
I would just say in the chat, if anybody on the audience is having a problem, please let us know. And Barb, if you enlarge your screen, I think we'll also not see your toolbar at the bottom or at the top.
Okay.
We're on pause.
Okay, well, alrighty, sorry about that. Let me go back to that now. Let's just go back here. Okay.
Okay, that looks good.
Okay, are we seeing it now? No. Sorry about that. Let's just go back. I think I have to reshare. Here we go.
Thanks everybody for sticking with us for a sec.
Okay, here we go. This will go ahead and play. Are you seeing her again? I mean, the postpartum.
No,
Yep.
I'm seeing-
You're not? Okay. You're not seeing it. You're saying, okay, here we go. So now this should show it. Yes?
yeah, that's it.
Good. Let me just quickly get it rolling and I'll cue back to where we were.
We propose
Sorry about that. Okay.
analysis allows us to see in what species the condition occurs and can help us ask important questions regarding our shared vulnerability. So here's a phylogeny that shows many species which experience maternal rejection. This behavior spans many taxa, including examples from fish, believe it or not, birds, as well as humans and other mammals. A recent review of peer-reviewed literature have revealed specific patterns of maternal rejection in domesticated animals, such as dogs, mares, ewes, goats, and pigs. Many of these studies have revealed that high stress levels during pregnancy and immediately following birth increase the risk of these behaviors in these animals. When examining postpartum syndromes, there are three main factors we have explored for patterns: characteristics of the mother, the neonate, and the birth. We compared literature of postpartum syndromes in humans to the aforementioned literature on postpartum syndromes in domesticated animals. And this table summarizes and compares our findings. So literature has shown here that increased risk factors for humans to experience postpartum depression would be young or old mothers, as well as multiparous mothers, meaning that they've had multiple labor and deliveries. Whereas in animals, we're looking more at young mothers and primiparous, meaning that they're first-time mothers. In the neonate, risk factors would include poor attachment or prematurity. And in animals, we're looking more at anomalous births. And then during the birth period, interestingly, humans and animals both have a shared risk factor of a C-section, and both can lead to postpartum syndromes. So perhaps the best evidence of a shared mechanism in postpartum syndrome in both humans and animals is the potential shared protective role of oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone released by the brain during labor that can also be administered externally as a medication. Studies have shown that intranasal oxytocin administration in humans has increased maternal behaviors and interest in the infant in women suffering from postpartum depression. Interestingly, it's also been shown that oxytocin administration induced maternal behavior in barren mares. Basically, this research is suggesting that there might be a shared commonality in the mechanism behind postpartum syndromes in animals as well as in humans. So in conclusion, the health of females is connected across the tree of life. Contained within the evolutionary legacy of motherhood may be vulnerability to this disorder. As we recognize these conditions, we are compelled to find common ground with the hope of breaking stigmas, providing better support for new parents, and hopefully getting closer to finding effective treatments. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Fantastic. That was Alex Masters, and Alex was actually a third-year medical student who is on her pediatric rotation, which is why she couldn't be with us live just now. But we've been doing some really exciting research in this area. So now we're going to shift from shared vulnerabilities, where we've talked about the shared vulnerability, to issues related to menstruation and endometriosis and to postpartum syndromes. And now we're going to begin to look at the evolved adaptations of other females as a source of insight and innovation for women's health. We are going to actually start with Mia Reynolds. Mia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Mia Reynolds. I am a recent graduate from University of California, Davis with a marine biology degree. And currently I'm researching the pregnant giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to the adverse effects of gestational hypertension in pregnant women. But today I want to start by, next, Barbara, thank you. I want to start by noting the fundamental question behind all of these projects that you're hearing about today, which is, can looking across species and evolutionary time accelerate scientific discovery and innovation? Next. And if so, what solutions can be found for women's health? Next. So I'm sure you guys have recognized this before. As Barbara was saying earlier on, complex multicellular animal life has been evolving for over 600 million years. And there have been female animals on the planet for at least that long. And hundreds of millions of years of evolved adaptations have led to tremendous biodiversity that we encounter on Earth. Next. So here we're looking at another phylogeny, and this is looking at when certain species evolved, from mammals to artiodactyl to primates on the bottom, and then you see us all the way down, tiny mark on the bottom right, humans. And looking at this phylogeny, I emphasize mammals because from there we can see the common ancestor of humans and other mammals, and how women share a great deal of physiology with other female mammals on this planet. Next. And we, all the way down on the bottom right here, like all other species, have independently developed unique physiologic adaptations. And our physiologic commonality with other species can help us understand why we get sick. But beyond this, within these physiologic differences between female mammals, there may be adaptations which have solved challenges in women's health and can serve as a guide for innovation. Next. So consider this. So in both men and women, joint overuse and injury can result in inflammatory changes, arthritis, and other functional limitations. Next. But some marsupials, on the other hand, such as the red kangaroo, have evolved very unique cartilages in their knees that enables them to endure very high compressive stress. And a 2018 study actually analyzed and identified the red kangaroo as potentially being a representation of a natural animal model for new designs in human cartilage engineering. Next. Or another consideration is looking at hypothermia, when humans can suffer from hypothermia when they're in very low temperatures, and this can end up being fatal. Next. But on the other hand, the nototheniod fish in Antarctica have developed proteins that work as antifreeze, allowing them to survive in extremely, extremely low water temperatures and avoid freezing to death. And researchers are now analyzing these proteins to use as a model for resistance to hypothermia and cryopreservation of tissues and organs for transplantation in humans. Next. So just looking at this, we know that there are multitudes of adaptations that we can learn, particularly for women's health. For example, can the remarkable ability of hibernating animals to retain bone strength, such as bears, guide us toward better approaches to preventing osteoporosis? Next. Or can the pregnant giraffe's ability to protect her fetus and herself from other effects of gestational hypertension provide insights for preventing the adverse effects of gestational hypertension that we see in women? Next. So again, just to summarize, contained within the biodiversity of female animal physiologies, there may be solutions for very important issues in women's health, from heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, infertility, and pregnancy-related conditions. And so the presentations that you're going to hear about after are just sort of brief overviews, a few of the projects our groups are working on as we turn to the natural world as a source of very invaluable insights for women's health. And I'm going to turn it over to Liana Owen and Daphne Pugh to discuss a natural animal model for resistance to osteoporosis.
Hi, I'm Liana. I'm a junior at Harvard College studying biomedical sciences and engineering with a minor in psychology, and I'll be presenting on yellow-bellied marmots as a natural animal model of resistance to osteoporosis.
Hi, I'm Daphne. I'm a junior at Harvard College studying human evolutionary biology, and I'll be presenting on giant pandas as a natural animal model of resistance to osteoporosis.
Next. Osteoporosis is the most common bone disease in humans and a major concern in women's health. In the United States, approximately 30% of women have osteoporosis, and 40% are expected to suffer an osteoporosis-induced fracture in their lifetimes. Next.
Osteoporosis is a condition that occurs due to an imbalance between bone growth and bone resorption. Specifically, osteoclasts, shown in purple, which are cells responsible for bone resorption, become overactive compared to osteoblasts, shown in orange, which are responsible for bone growth. Next. This results in a decrease in bone density over time that leaves bones fragile and more susceptible to fracture. Next.
Although many factors contribute to bone loss, two that are especially relevant to women include a lack of mechanical stress on the bones due to lower weight and reduced physical activity, and a lack of estrogen after menopause or from irregular menstruation. While reduced mechanical stress and low estrogen cause osteoporosis in humans, other species encounter those conditions without developing the disease. Humans, yellow-bellied marmots, and giant pandas shared a common ancestor, shown by the big red dot on the phylogeny, around 90 million years ago. However, in the time that they became distinct species, marmots and giant pandas evolved adaptations against osteoporosis. In particular, yellow-bellied marmots experience minimal mechanical stress on their bones while they hibernate for 6 to 8 months each year, but emerge with little bone loss. Ovulating only once a year, female giant pandas have lower estrogen exposure, but still evade osteoporosis. Exploring the evolved mechanisms that protect these species from osteoporosis can provide ideas for novel treatments in humans. Next. Yellow-bellied marmots are one species that have evolved resistance to osteoporosis, resulting from reduced mechanical stress on the bones. Their protection against the disease is tied to a signaling pathway involving CB1 receptors and 2-AG molecules. To begin, I'll explain how this pathway can lead to osteoporosis. Here's the normal bone with osteoclasts, osteoblasts, and osteocytes, a type of stem cell that can differentiate into other bone cells. Next. A key characteristic of osteoclasts and osteoblasts is that they have a receptor on their surfaces called CB1. Next.
Did I go too far? Hang on, there I go.
Osteoblasts inside the bone marrow produce a molecule called 2-AG that binds to the CB1 receptors. Next. This binding stimulates osteoclast activity, which leads to bone degradation. Under normal conditions, this bone degradation is balanced by bone formation, but when bones are not receiving enough mechanical stress, the number of CB1 receptors increases. As a result, more binding can occur between the receptors and 2-AG. Now, bone degradation becomes disproportionately high, leading to osteoporosis. Next. Yellow-bellied marmots prevent excess bone degradation while they hibernate through a molecule called MAGL. MAGL is present in marmot bones in low levels while they are active. Next. But increases by 98-fold during hibernation. Next. This molecule binds to 2-AG, preventing it from instead binding to the CB1 receptors. Next. Consequently, osteoclasts are not stimulated to degrade the bone, and osteocytes differentiate into osteoblasts and adipocytes, so the balance between osteoclasts and osteoblast activity is maintained. We hypothesize that MAGL contributes, at least in part, to protecting yellow-bellied marmots from osteoporosis. Next.
Estrogen is critical to bone health and its prevention of bone resorptive activity. And while there are many different pathways that estrogen regulates this process, next. In its inhibition of the pro-inflammatory cytokine IL-7 shown here, next. Estrogen prevents T-cell mediated osteoclastgenesis by decreasing production of a bone-resorptive ligand rank L, next. When estrogen is present, this pathway is properly regulated. There's balance between bone resorption and bone formation, resulting in healthy bone. Next. However, in estrogen deficiency, this pathway is no longer properly regulated. Next. Now, pro-inflammatory cytokines are able to increase osteoclastgenesis, causing chronic bone resorption, ultimately leading to osteoporotic bone. Next. More specifically, the now activated T cells trigger osteoclastgenesis by increasing production and binding of rank L to its receptor located on bone-resorbing osteoclasts. Next. This results in unbalanced bone remodeling and osteoporotic bone. Next. Giant pandas only have a single estrous cycle annually for about 24 to 72 hours, and therefore don't have the estrogen stimulation seen in women with regularly occurring estrous cycles. Given the importance of estrogen in bone health and the absence of recurrent ovulatory estrogen exposure, we might predict that giant pandas would be vulnerable to osteoporosis, yet the absence of the condition in the species suggests an evolved adaptation that allows giant pandas to maintain bone integrity without cyclical exposure to estrogen as occurs in women. Next. Plant-derived phytoestrogens mimic the activity of estrogen by binding to estrogen receptors and affecting reproductive hormone activity. More specifically, phytoestrogens have been shown to affect lactation and mediate egg production. Given that bamboo constitutes 99% of the giant panda diet, phytoestrogens are thought to play a significant role in panda reproductive activity. Indeed, female giant pandas with bamboo diets that contain a greater percentage of total flavonoids, which is a main category of phytoestrogens, have higher urinary estradiol concentrations, which is a measurement of the reproductive hormone estrogen. The significant link between bamboo total flavonoid concentration and estradiol may contribute to estrogenic activity, and pandas may have adaptations for phytoestrogen sensitivity from bamboo, given its impact on reproductive hormones. Next. Therefore, a possible evolved adaptation against osteoporosis may lie in the unique giant panda diet. Especially in giant pandas with greater bamboo total flavonoid content, the significant correlation between total flavonoids and urinary estradiol may provide a possible mechanism against osteoporosis in the absence of a regular estrous cycle. Next. We hypothesize that the reproductive adaptations provided by the increased estrogen content due to bamboo phytoestrogens may have a secondary effect on maintaining bone health by inhibiting pro-inflammatory cytokines from initiating their bone resorptive activity. Next. The two animal models and hypothesized pathways presented here expose new insights into evolved animal adaptations for osteoporosis resistance. The yellow-bellied marmot and the giant panda, two distinct species that we may expect to be most vulnerable to the condition, have evolved unique physiology to avoid such risk. In this way, bioinspiration serves as a critical tool for novel treatment to human disease, as the species-spanning lens applied here may expand future treatment possibilities for women who suffer from osteoporosis. And now, we're going to hear about another natural animal model of resistance to an issue in women's health from Stephanie Chan.
Happy Earth Day, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chan. I'm a recent 2020 graduate from Harvard College, where I studied human developmental and regenerative biology. I'm currently teaching 9th grade biology as a Teach for America core member, and today I'm here to share our research on the pregnant giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to the adverse effects of gestational hypertension. Next. Our group has been focused on one of the leading causes of maternal and fetal mortality worldwide, that is high blood pressure or hypertension during pregnancy. Around 10% of pregnancies are complicated by hypertensive disorders like gestational hypertension, which is the condition our group is studying. Gestational hypertension increases the likelihood of complications to both the mother and the fetus. For instance, affected mothers are at risk of serious cardiovascular, neurological, and renal effects during pregnancy, and also may face increased risk of cardiovascular events after pregnancy. Gestational hypertension may also develop into a more severe hypertensive condition called preeclampsia. Next. And another next. We believe that the pregnant giraffe may represent a natural animal model of resistance to the adverse effects of high blood pressure during pregnancy. Next. Why do we believe this? Well, giraffes are the tallest terrestrial animals on Earth, standing at over 5.5 meters tall. The giraffe's iconically long neck puts a vertical distance of about 2.5 meters or 8 feet between its heart and its brain. That's a really large distance, so it might not be surprising to know that the giraffe has high systolic blood pressures around 200 to 300 millimeters of mercury at their heart level. In fact, research has shown that giraffes have allometrically scaled high blood pressure in comparison to other similarly sized mammals. Despite their high blood pressure, the species appear to be resistant to harmful hypertension-related gestational effects. Next. This is a rectangular phylogeny showing the evolutionary relationships among several arteriodactyla or even-toed hoofed animals. Next. Here we see the giraffe and the okapi, which is the giraffe's closest relative. Giraffes and okapi shared a common ancestor around 11.5 million years ago, but studies have shown that giraffes have genomic differences unique to the species and separate from the okapi. Thus, we believe that in the last 11.5 million years, female giraffes seem to have evolved unique adaptations that protect the fetus and themselves from the detrimental effects of gestational hypertension. Next. Our group is working to understand the mechanisms that allow pregnant giraffes to protect their fetus and themselves from the unfavorable effects of high blood pressure. Next. Based on recent genomics research, we suspect that there may be a difference in vascular-related genes between giraffes and other hoofed animals. Next. In summary, during healthy giraffe pregnancies, mother and fetus are exposed to blood pressures that would be harmful to humans and many other studied mammals. Again, we hypothesize that species-specific adaptations in the physiology of pregnant giraffes confer resistance to the negative effects of high blood pressure. Understanding the nature of these adaptations, the pathways, and the unique genomics involved may provide a blueprint for approaching the treatment and prevention of adverse maternal and fetal effects of gestational hypertension in human pregnancy. The giraffe may also be an important natural animal model for other key challenges in women's health. To hear more about this, Tejas Shivkumar.
And Tejas can't be with us, so we will hear from him on this video.
Hi, my name is Tejas Shivkumar, and I'm a senior at Brentwood School in Los Angeles, California. Today, I'll be discussing how the giraffe is a natural animal model of resistance to heart failure in women and how we can use it to develop therapies to treat heart failure in women in the future. So first of all, we must discuss cardiovascular disease in women. Cardiovascular disease, or CVD, is a leading cause of death in women, and heart failure is a very common form of CVD. However, one form of heart failure has been on the rise. This form of heart failure arises due to untreated high blood pressures that are also persistent, which is known as hypertension. As the heart muscle is forced to work harder and harder due to extremely high blood pressures, it begins to thicken, and this thickening leads to stiffening. This stiffness of the heart leads to symptoms of heart failure, including shortness of breath and inability to move as quickly as an individual could previously. This entails things such as exercise intolerance and even the inability to walk at normal speeds. This can seriously damage individuals, so it was pressing to find a solution to this kind of heart failure. Enter the giraffe as a natural animal model for resistance to this kind of heart failure. Unique cardiovascular adaptations of the giraffe may protect it from adverse effects of high blood pressure that are typically seen in women and men. As a healthy giraffe develops, its brain is pushed farther and farther from its heart. This increasing vertical distance increases the pressure on the heart, effectively exposing it to high blood pressures to up to 300 millimeters of mercury. When scaled with other mammals and their typical blood pressures, giraffes have blood pressures that are exceeding mammals of comparable size by a significant amount. The giraffe ventricle thickens in response to these rising blood pressures, but it appears to be protected from the adverse effects that we see when this high blood pressure is exhibited in humans. Now, we have to look at the evolution of the giraffe to understand where this resistance comes from. Approximately 11 million years ago, the modern giraffe and okapi shared a common ancestor. And over that period, presumably, the giraffe has evolved adaptations to protect it from hypertension as seen in humans. Why is that? Well, the giraffe is a prey species whose survival depends on.
Sorry. Oh my goodness.
Hi,
sorry.
my name
sorry.
is Tejas Shivkumar, and I'm a senior at Brentwood School.
Hang on. Sorry about that. Okay, almost. Are you seeing the screen now?
No, it's just you, Barb.
Okay, sorry. I thought the video was going to run. Forgive me. Here we go. Apologies. We're going to get it started right away. Here we go. And there. And okay, so here.
Hi, my name is significant amount. Adverse 11 million years, presumably. Why is that? Well, the giraffe is a prey species whose survival depends on its ability to flee predators without limitations on its natural running speed. And other evolutionary processes may have thereby produced a natural animal model of resistance to one of the leading causes of death in women. Animals in the natural world can be a source of insights into women's health, and this is only one of the countless reasons it's critical to protect the health and welfare of other species on our planet. We're working with veterinarians and physiologists from around the world to better understand the remarkable physiology of the.
All right, well, Tejas, that was fantastic. You got cut off there a little bit, but that was just fascinating and superb. We're actually going to now hear from Dr. Emily Schweitzer.
Hey everyone, by way of introduction, my name is Emily Schweitzer. My brief background is that I majored in evolutionary anthropology in undergrad. I completed medical school at Duke University, and now I'm actually in my final stretch of residency in internal medicine at UCLA, and will be starting fellowship in pulmonary and critical care at UCLA in July. I'm interested in researching comparative physiology, teaching evolutionary medicine, and pretty much all things female health. And I too have been working with Steph and Mia on using giraffes as a naturally occurring model of resistance to the adverse effects of hypertension in pregnancy. So earlier on, Steph and Tejas outlined the remarkable adaptations to elevated blood pressure in giraffes. So the next step in trying to understand these species-specific biological mechanisms, we need to first review, in brief, the pathophysiology of hypertension in pregnancy in both humans and giraffes. Next. So this is a pretty busy figure, but what it's trying to convey is that there is a multitude of genetic adaptations throughout the giraffe's body that confer protection against end organ damage associated with hypertension, including heart failure in giraffes. As Tejas mentioned, there is a lack of fibrosis and pathologic cardiac remodeling that is normally seen in humans, which permits the giraffe to maintain exercise tolerance in the wild. Next. And now to pivot to the placenta in humans. So in pregnancy, the mechanisms of hypertension are multifold and quite complex, but the hallmark of the pathologic hypertension during pregnancy in humans is insufficient blood flow from mom at the bottom of the screen to the placenta, which is up at the top, through the spiral arteries in the placenta. And it is this unfavorable remodeling of these arteries that is the common feature of the disease. Next. So what this spiral artery remodeling does is what we term as uteroplacental insufficiency or insufficient blood flow from mom to placenta. And this leads to placental hypoxia, which then leads to oxidative stress, an exaggerated immune response. In tandem, we also see a decrease in vasodilators that leads to abnormal vasculature and what we call anti-angiogenesis. And then there's also, in this kind of wake of this inflammatory milieu, there's genetic changes, alterations in the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, which is responsible for regulating blood pressure. And in turn, this leads to widespread endothelial dysfunction in mom and consequential hypertension. So it are all of these dynamic interactions that lead us back to reduced placental perfusion, which starts this cycle all over again and leads to the pathophysiology of hypertension and consequential preeclampsia in humans. So how do we use all of this to understand pregnancy in giraffes? Next. So intriguingly, our group and others have found several protective vascular adaptations against hypertension across several different organs outlined here, including the heart. As mentioned, giraffes are able to maintain exercise tolerance even in the setting of thickened ventricles, classically associated with heart failure in humans. The kidneys, they upregulate certain genes that limit the amount of renal blood flow and by extension maintain a low glomerular filtration rate, which is typically causes kidney failure in humans. We also don't see the same level of vascular insufficiency as we do in humans. Moreover, we actually have protection against the maladaptive endothelial cascade that I mentioned in the last slide. And because giraffes need to maintain a certain amount of vigilance in the wild, they've evolved mechanisms to protect their eyes from retinopathy that would typically leave one blind. So the intriguing part here is the relative amount that is unknown at the level of the giraffe's placenta. So what we do know is that giraffes carry their fetus to term, and so must have some vascular adaptations to protect in high blood pressure during pregnancy in order to confer reproductive success. Next. So it's with this background that our group decided to test the hypothesis that giraffes are a naturally occurring model of resistance to hypertensive disorders in pregnancy with the demonstrated ability to withstand high blood pressures without deleterious effects on the fetus. And in doing so, we're collaborating with pathologists, with physiologists, with veterinarians around the world in order to analyze various maternal and placental characteristics. Specifically, we hope to look at several angiogenic factors, the vascular integrity of the placenta, as well as genes encoding for protection against hypertension in pregnancy using comparative genomics. So this in turn will help us explore female health beyond the traditional human-centered perspective using natural occurring animal models to guide us clinically. Next. So I hope you all can tell how much we absolutely love what we do and how passionate we are about what we do. And our hope is that today excited you all about how pathophysiology is rooted in common ancestry. And it is this shared ancestry that has in the past and will continue in the future to provide insights for biomedical innovation in women's health and beyond. So with this, I'll pass it over to Barbara for some closing statements.
I'm actually speechless. Everybody, you students, you guys just have blown me away. So I'm going to say a couple of words. We're going to just return to Rachel Carson for just a moment. You know, it's interesting that I was looking back at the timing of things in the past, in the 20th century, and of course Rachel Carson, you know, passed away in 1964. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Act, passed in 1973. And 1973 is really a year that I think about fairly often, because a couple of things happened that really connect to my work and to this research that you students are so engaged with. So it was in 1973, for example, that Theodosius Dobzhansky published, you know, his famous article, "Nothing in Biology Makes Sense Outside the Light of Evolution." And since women's health, every aspect of female health and women's health is a part of biology, nothing in women's health, nothing in female health makes sense outside the light of evolution. And applying the species spanning and evolutionary lens, these lenses, can truly allow us to see patterns and trends and make connections that can really lead to innovation. And so that was one thing that happened in 1973. But the other piece of this is that it was in 1973 that the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to 3 animal scientists. Here is Nico Tinbergen in this picture. But I'd want to draw your attention as we close to a line that was said by the man who was presenting the prize, Borge Kronholm, at the ceremony. He said, in shameless vanity, we baptized ourselves Homo sapiens, the wise apes. And I think that this really points to the importance of humility and openness in this new era. That if we in fact are wise apes, if we are going to show ourselves to be wise apes, I believe we are going to need to recognize the continuity of health across species, the shared responsibility we as humans have for the health of other species and the planet. And if we can do that, I think we will demonstrate ourselves to, in fact, be wise. And I hope we can. And I'll tell you that working with this group of students really is just the most uplifting, positive, exciting experience. Every one of you, I'm so proud of the work that you've done. And I hope that people who are listening, if you're interested in joining us in our in this launch of female health across the tree of life, I have lots of ideas. We want collaborators. We feel this is a moment in this hopefully post-COVID period that we can begin applying new lenses, looking for connections, seeing life in a way that recognizes the importance of all lives, and in doing so really improves the health of all lives. So again, I want to pass back to Dawn, to Dr. Zimmerman, and just to say, to address Dawn, just to say, it's really a privilege to work with veterinarians. I love that our partnership here to enhance the health of females across the tree of life is a collaboration between veterinarians and physicians. And it doesn't have to be exclusively that, but that's the root of this. So I want to thank you for making this happen. And if you'd like to say some closing words.
Yes, and thank you guys so very much. Super inspiring. I would love to do this again, kind of more as a panel, because I'm very curious how different disciplines come together. What is the interest when you're going to medical school? How did Barb suck you into this idea? Or was it, you know, what made that inspirational link to this project? That's I applaud your efforts with that. Totally agree that this type of interdisciplinary collaboration and also looking towards focal areas that have previously been a neglected focus is optimistic. And, you know, we've always, and everybody knows that we're connected to our world, and what we do to our environment is going to come back to us. But how do we take that a step further and start applying what we know? So we know we're slowly destroying the planet, but there are optimistic things that are happening out there, and everyone plays a part. Everyone's doing some optimistic things. And I just think it's time to communicate that and bring everybody together and kind of get the perspective of the big picture. Stop having everything be so siloed, right? And I think this is a great demonstration of that. So I thank you guys so much. I know we're going to post this as a recording, and where we post that on the, Andrea has put in the chat the page, and then the bios of the speakers as well. Anyone can always contact me, and I'm sure Dr. Horowitz as well. If you would like to get involved, like I said, this is an open thing. Every discipline can contribute. And again, what we like to see, what's optimistic, and I think what's perfect for Earth Day. So thank you very much for all the students. You guys are amazing, and for everyone who joined.
Fantastic. And thank you, Andrea.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
It's going to be abrupt.
Well, if we can all pretend that we're in DC, and we're going to do some sightseeing, and then we're going to all have a great lunch together. So let's raise our glasses and have a virtual connect. High fives all around. Just so exciting. I can't wait to talk more research. Let's take a 1-hour break and let's get back to work. So just kidding. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of our.
Bye.